The year was 2187. Earth had changed. Not slowly, the way it used to change through decades of war and politics and broken promises. It changed all at once, the moment the Galactic Council made first contact. It happened on a Tuesday. Nobody ever forgot that detail. A Tuesday morning when most of the eastern United States was still drinking coffee and watching the news, when farmers in the Midwest were just stepping outside to check the sky, when children in California were barely waking up for school, that was the moment the sky cracked open with light. Not fire. Not explosions. Light. Pure, golden, almost gentle light that stretched from one horizon to the other like God had pulled back a curtain. Every screen on Earth, every phone, every television, every billboard, every tablet, went dark for exactly 3 seconds. Then a single message appeared in every language simultaneously. People of Earth, you are not alone. You never were. We are the Galactic Council. We have watched you for 10,000 years. You are ready. Open your skies. We are coming in peace. Commander Rachel Hayes was 39 years old, a decorated Air Force pilot and the head of Earth's newly formed Unified Space Defense Division. She was sitting in a Pentagon briefing room when the message came through. She read it twice. Then she looked at General Marcus Webb across the table and said quietly, "Sir, I don't think we have a choice here." General Webb, a broad-shouldered man in his late 60s with silver hair and a face that looked like it had personally fought every war of the last 40 years, folded his hands on the table. "We never do, Commander. We never do." Within 72 hours, the Galactic Council's first delegation ship entered Earth's atmosphere. It was enormous, 3 miles wide, shaped like a flat diamond, silver and humming with energy that made every compass on Earth spin wildly. It landed, if you could call it landing, in the Nevada desert, hovering just 40 feet above the ground. 12 figures stepped out. They called themselves the Vreth, tall, thin, with pale blue skin and large black eyes that reflected light like mirrors. They wore flowing white robes and moved with a quiet grace that made every human soldier standing in the perimeter grip their rifle a little tighter. Their leader introduced himself as High Counselor Zarin. He spoke perfect English, perfect every language actually, and his voice was calm and almost musical. "We welcome Earth to the galactic community," Zarin said, his black eyes scanning the line of human diplomats and military officers. "You have survived your adolescence as a species. You are ready to join something much larger than yourselves." Rachel stood 20 feet away, studying Zarin the way she studied every unknown threat, with complete attention and zero visible emotion. Something about his smile bothered her. It was perfect. Too perfect. Like a face that had learned what a smile was supposed to look like but had never actually felt one. She kept that thought to herself. In the months that followed, Earth was flooded with new technology. The Vreth shared clean energy systems that eliminated fossil fuel dependency within a year. They shared medical advances that cured diseases humans had been fighting for centuries. Cancer, gone. Alzheimer's, gone. Even aging itself was slowed dramatically by a small blue pill the Vreth called Vero that they distributed freely across every nation on Earth. People wept in the streets. Religious leaders called it the Second Coming. Scientists called it the greatest leap in human history. Politicians called it an opportunity. Rachel called it a transaction. "Nothing is free," she told her second-in-command, Lieutenant Daniel Cross, one evening as they reviewed the latest council communications in their Colorado Springs headquarters. Daniel was 32, sharp-eyed and quick-thinking, the kind of officer who finished your sentences, and was usually right. "Every single thing they've given us has a price attached to it that we just haven't seen the invoice for yet." Daniel leaned back in his chair, spinning a pen between his fingers. "You think they want something from us?" "I think they've always wanted something from us," Rachel said. "I just don't know what it is yet." She would find out. But not before Earth made the biggest mistake in its history. 18 months after first contact, the Galactic Council formally invited Earth to sign the Treaty of Stars, a comprehensive agreement that would make Earth a full member of the galactic community, granting access to Council trade routes, military protection, and unlimited technology sharing. In exchange, Earth would contribute soldiers to the Galactic Defense Force, share its natural resources under a Council-supervised quota system, and, this was the part that troubled Rachel most, agree to a clause called Article 7, which gave the Council the authority to intervene in Earth matters if the Council determined that Earth's internal conflicts posed a risk to galactic stability. Rachel stood up in the middle of the signing ceremony broadcast and said, clearly and on record, "That clause gives them the right to occupy us." The room went silent. President Alan Torres, a tall man with tired eyes and the weight of 8 billion people on his shoulders, looked at her from across the room. "Commander Hayes," he said carefully. The Council has given us more in 18 months than we achieved in 2,000 years. I think we can afford to trust them. With respect, Mr. President, Rachel said, that's exactly what they want you to think. She was overruled. The Treaty of Stars was signed by every nation on Earth on March 14, 2189. Rachel Hayes went back to her office, sat down at her desk, and opened a new file on her secure terminal. She titled it simply, Contingency. She didn't know yet what she was preparing for. But something in her gut, that same instinct that had kept her alive through 3 combat tours and 100 impossible situations, told her that she was going to need it. Outside her window, the Nevada sky was full of Council ships, gleaming like new stars. The first year of Earth's official membership in the galactic community was, by almost every measure, extraordinary. Poverty collapsed. The Council's energy technology made electricity essentially free, which meant food production exploded, transportation costs dropped to almost nothing, and for the first time in recorded history, the basic needs of every human being on Earth were being met. People had clean water. They had food. They had medicine. They had warmth. And they had hope. Real, genuine, electric hope that spread across every culture and every nation like a sunrise that never ended. Rachel watched all of it and felt proud. She wasn't made of stone. She could see what the Council had given humanity and she was grateful for it. But she never stopped watching. Never stopped asking questions. And never stopped adding pages to the contingency file. The Council's ambassador to Earth was a Vreth named Salin, younger than Zarin, with the same pale blue skin and mirror black eyes, but with a manner that was warmer, more conversational. Salin had a habit of stopping by Rachel's headquarters unannounced, which annoyed her deeply but which she never showed. You never seem happy, Commander, Salin observed one afternoon, standing at Rachel's window and looking out at a line of Council supply ships unloading medical equipment in the distance. Earth is thriving. Your people are thriving. Yet you always look like someone who is waiting for a storm. I grew up in Oklahoma, Rachel said without looking up from her desk. We're always waiting for a storm. Salin laughed, a musical, genuine sound that was somehow worse than a fake one. You are remarkable, Commander. Most of your species accepted us completely within 6 months. You are the last one still holding your breath. I'm the last one still doing my job, Rachel said. Salin left. Rachel pulled up the treaty again and read Article 7 for the 100th time. The Galactic Council reserves the right to intervene in Earth matters if the Council determines that Earth's internal conflicts pose a risk to galactic stability. She highlighted the word determines. That was the problem. Not the intervention itself, the determination. The Council decided what was a risk. The Council decided when to act. Earth had no vote, no appeal, no warning. It was a leash. A very long, very comfortable leash, but a leash. 3 months later, Rachel found out she was right. It started with a small conflict in Eastern Europe, a border dispute between 2 nations that had been arguing over the same strip of land for decades. Under normal circumstances, it would have been handled diplomatically within a few months. But one of the nations had a radical new government that decided to move troops to the border, and the situation escalated quickly. Before Earth's own diplomatic corps could intervene, a Galactic Council peacekeeping force, 3 warships and roughly 2,000 Vreth soldiers, appeared in orbit above the region and sent a message to both governments. By authority of Article 7 of the Treaty of Stars, the Galactic Council is assuming temporary administration of this dispute. All military movement must cease immediately. Non-compliance will be met with force. Both governments stood down. The conflict was over in 4 hours. The world largely applauded. Efficient. Clean. No casualties. The Council had stepped in, calmed things down and stepped back. But Rachel was on the phone with General Webb within minutes. They used it, she said. I saw, Webb said, his voice heavy. This was a test run, Rachel said. A small, easy conflict where everyone would cheer when they stepped in. They're establishing precedent, sir. They're establishing the habit of intervening. And once the habit is established. I know, Webb said. I know, Rachel. But we signed the treaty. Yes, sir, Rachel said. We did. She added 12 new pages to the contingency file that night. The second use of Article 7 came 4 months later. This time it was a political disagreement, a coalition of African nations attempting to renegotiate their resource quota with the Council. They had determined, correctly, that their share of the resource contribution was disproportionately large compared to wealthier nations, and they formally requested a review. The Council's response was swift and chilling. They declared the renegotiation attempt a destabilizing action, under Article 7 and deployed a diplomatic enforcement team to the African Union headquarters. They didn't use weapons. They didn't need to. They simply shut off the clean energy grid to 3 capital cities for 6 hours. 6 hours of darkness. 6 hours of hospitals running on backup generators, of water treatment plants struggling, of traffic chaos and fear. The renegotiation request was withdrawn. Rachel found out about the energy shutdown through an independent source. It was never officially reported. She drove to General Webb's office in person and laid a folder on his desk. They used the energy grid as a weapon, she said, against people who were doing nothing more than asking for fairness. Webb looked at the folder. He looked older every time she saw him. Rachel. They control our power, sir, she said. They control our medicine supply chain. They have ships in orbit. They have soldiers on the ground. And they just demonstrated, quietly to anyone paying attention, that they are not partners. They are administrators. And we are not members of the galactic community. She leaned forward and pressed her finger on the folder. We are a colony. The room was silent for a long time. General Webb looked at the folder. He picked it up. He read the first page. Then he looked at Rachel with eyes that had finally lost their last trace of hope. What's in the contingency file? He said. Rachel sat down across from him for the first time in years. Everything, she said. HFY. From this point forward, we start building our way out. Rachel didn't go to the president. She didn't go to the UN. She didn't go to any of the bodies that the council had spent 2 years quietly surrounding with influence, comfort, and dependency. She went underground. Literally. 3 months earlier, using budget lines buried so deep in the Defense Department that even most of the Pentagon couldn't find them, Rachel had begun construction on what she called Site Cairo, a vast underground complex built into the granite bedrock beneath the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. The name Cairo came from an old word she'd always liked, meaning to care deeply for something, to guard it with everything you have. Site Cairo was humanity's secret heart. It spanned 11 levels, stretched for nearly 2 miles, and had been built by a rotating crew of 300 engineers, physicists, and military specialists who had each been personally vetted by Rachel. No one person knew everything about Site Cairo. Each team knew only their section. Only Rachel and 5 others held the complete picture. General Webb was the first of the 5 she briefed. He arrived by unmarked car on a Tuesday night, the same day of the week as first contact, a detail Rachel noted with dark humor, and spent 4 hours walking the facility. When they emerged from the final level, Webb said nothing for a long time. He stood in the main corridor with his hands in his coat pockets, staring at the rows of dormant machinery. How long? He asked finally. Until it's operational? If we push hard, 18 months, Rachel said. If we have to be careful and keep it quiet, 3 years? We don't have 3 years, Webb said. No, Rachel agreed. We don't. The core team came together over the next 8 weeks. Rachel handpicked each of them. Dr. Nina Patel, 44, the most brilliant propulsion engineer on Earth, who had spent the last 2 years secretly reverse engineering Council energy technology and had quietly concluded, on her own, that something was deeply wrong with the Council's intentions. She arrived at Site Cairo with 12 hard drives full of data and a look on her face that said she was relieved to finally be in a room where she didn't have to pretend everything was fine. I've been waiting for someone to do this, Nina said, looking around at the facility. I was starting to think I was going to have to do it alone. You almost were, Rachel said. Colonel James Ortega, 51, former Marine, currently commanding Earth's small but growing orbital defense platform. Ortega was broad, quiet, and methodical, with the kind of calm that came not from lack of feeling but from having processed every possible version of a situation before it happened. He looked at Rachel's briefing materials and simply said, "Tell me what you need me to build." Dr. Priya Shin, 38, a xenolinguist who had spent the last year on the official council translation team and had, in that time, quietly compiled a private database of Vreth communication patterns that revealed something deeply troubling. The Vreth had 2 languages. One they used with humans. One they used among themselves. Priya had spent a year learning the second one. What does it say? Rachel asked the first time Priya laid her research on the table. Priya's face was carefully still. I'll show you the full translation. But the short version is this: they don't call us members. They call us Harvan. In their private language, Harvan means something between livestock and resource deposit. The room went completely silent. Rachel looked at General Webb. He looked back at her. That's it, Webb said quietly. That's the proof. It's not proof they'll accept in any public forum, Priya said. They'll deny the translation, discredit the methodology, and my career will be over within a week. We're not going public, Rachel said. Not yet. Right now we're going to build something they cannot deny, discredit, or survive. She looked around the room at each face, Nina with her hard drives, Ortega with his quiet readiness, Priya with her terrible knowledge, Webb with his soldier's eyes. We're going to build the Armada. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. An Armada? Ortega said slowly. You're talking about a fleet. A full combat space fleet, Rachel confirmed. Warships, fighters, carriers, everything. Built here, underground, using reverse-engineered council technology and 100 improvements that Nina has been developing for 2 years. Ships that can match a council warship on speed and firepower and can exceed them on maneuverability and, here's the key, on crew. Nina leaned forward. Because we designed them for humans. The council ships are built for Vreth physiology. Ours will be built for us. We can tolerate higher acceleration, work in tighter spaces, and, she paused and smiled for the first time since Rachel had met her. We are significantly angrier than they expected. A ripple of something went through the room. Not quite laughter. Determination maybe. The specific determination of people who have been underestimated for the last time. How do we keep it hidden? Webb asked. The energy grid, Rachel said. They control the surface grid. But Site-Caro runs entirely on pre-contact Earth power, nuclear specifically, from 3 reactors they don't know about because they were decommissioned on paper 6 years ago but never actually shut down. We're invisible to their energy monitoring. Materials? Ortega said. Stockpiled over 2 years through falsified infrastructure projects, Rachel said. If they look at the records they see road construction, water treatment upgrades, agricultural expansion. The materials are actually here. Personnel? That's the hardest part, Rachel admitted. We need pilots, engineers, weapons crews, people who can operate a fleet that doesn't exist yet, for a war we're hoping we never have to start. She paused. But we have to be ready to start it. She looked at each of them one more time. The council chose the wrong species to underestimate. Caro, from this moment this facility is everything. We guard it with our lives. Building an Armada in secret is not a dramatic thing. It's not explosive or glorious. It's slow, grinding, exhausting, and terrifying in the quietest possible way. Every day is a calculation of risk. Who to trust, what to order, how to move materials, how to train crews, how to do all of it while smiling at council ambassadors and attending treaty compliance meetings and pretending, every single day, that everything is fine. Rachel was good at pretending. Lieutenant Daniel Cross had been her second in command for 6 years, and she finally brought him into Site-Caro 9 months into construction. She watched his face as she walked him through the facility. He was quiet the whole time, unusual for Daniel who had an opinion about everything. When they reached level 7 where the first hull segments of the Armada's lead ship were already taking shape, he stopped walking. He stood in front of those hull segments for a long time. The metal was dark and dense, an alloy that Nina's team had developed from a combination of terrestrial titanium and a repurposed element from council trade shipments that, officially, Earth had received as raw industrial material. Unofficially, Nina had discovered it was approximately 4 times harder than anything humans had previously worked with and could absorb directed energy weapons without fracturing. Daniel reached out and touched the metal. What are you going to name her? He said. The lead ship. Rachel said. I haven't decided yet. You should call her Caro, Daniel said. Because that's what this is. The most cared for thing on Earth. Rachel looked at the hull. Caro, she said softly. Yeah. Maybe. She brought Daniel fully in that night. Within 2 weeks, he had reorganized the personnel logistics system so completely that what had previously been a 36-month training timeline was compressed to 22 months without any loss of quality. Daniel had a talent for people, for knowing who was right for a role before they knew it themselves, for keeping morale from breaking during the long, airless nights underground when the pressure of secrecy weighed on everyone like a physical thing. Morale was a genuine challenge. The 300 people who knew about Site-Caro lived with an extraordinary burden. They couldn't tell their families where they were going when they disappeared for weeks at a time. They couldn't explain the tension in their faces, the dark circles under their eyes, the way they sometimes stared at the sky with an expression that was equal parts love and fear. Several people came close to breaking down. 2 people resigned, and were quietly, respectfully placed in circumstances where their silence was ensured not through threat, but through something Rachel believed in more deeply, dignity. She met with each of them personally. She told them the truth about everything. And she asked them, not as their commander but as a human being, to hold this secret. Both of them held it. Meanwhile, above ground, the Council tightened its grip. The third use of Article 7 came in month 14, this time targeting a joint military exercise between the United States, China, and India that the Council declared a provocative display of unified terrestrial force. The three nations were ordered to stand down and reduce their combined military presence to pre-Council levels within 30 days. The world barely flinched. Most people didn't even notice. The Council's public communications were so smooth, so reassuring, so full of language about peace and community and mutual prosperity that the actual content, "We are now telling Earth's largest military powers how many soldiers they can have," slid right past the public consciousness like water off glass. Rachel noticed. Priya noticed. The Sci-Fi team noticed. "They're reducing Earth's defensive capability," Ortega said at their next full briefing, his voice flat and controlled. "Step by step. Slowly enough that no one panics. But the direction is clear." "They want us defenseless," Daniel said. "They want us dependent," Rachel corrected. "There's a difference. Defenseless is a state. Dependent is a relationship. They want us to need them so completely that the question of defending ourselves never even occurs to us." She paused. "SYMGHY, from this point on we accelerate. I don't care what it costs. We push the timeline from 22 months to 14. Nina almost objected. Almost. Then she looked at the data on the table, the Council's military orders, the energy grid control they were expanding, the way Article 7 was being used more and more casually, and she closed her mouth and nodded. 14 months, Nina said. "I'll need 50 more engineers." "You'll have them by Thursday," Daniel said. The acceleration changed everything. Site Caro shifted from a careful, methodical construction project to something that felt, in its underground silence, like a controlled explosion. 3 shifts running around the clock. Hull sections being completed and moved to assembly bays with a precision and speed that even Ortega, who had overseen the construction of Earth's orbital defense platform, found breathtaking. The lead ship, Caro, was the first to take full shape. 300 meters long, narrow and dark and deeply aggressive in her lines. Not beautiful the way the Council ships were beautiful, with their smooth curves and glowing surfaces. Caro was built for function, for survival, for the specific purpose of matching a Vreth warship and winning. Her hull was the dark alloy. Her weapons were a combination of kinetic rail systems that Nina had enhanced to fire at hypersonic velocities, and directed energy projectors that used a principle the Council had never encountered because humanity had developed it independently, a resonance frequency weapon that targeted the specific crystalline structure in Vreth warship hulls and vibrated them apart. The Council had given Earth technology. What they hadn't expected was that Earth would take that technology, study it, break it down to its bones and come back with something new. Rachel stood on the observation deck above Assembly Bay 1 and watched Caro come together over the course of months. She came here when the weight of it got too heavy, the secrecy, the responsibility, the knowledge of what she was building and why and what it would mean to use it. She came here and looked at the ship and reminded herself of what Priya had translated. Harvan. Livestock. Resource deposit. 8 billion people. Reduced to a word that meant something between property and raw material. Not on her watch. Not on Earth's watch. She would build every ship. She would train every crew. She would be ready for the moment, and she believed with absolute certainty that the moment was coming, when the Council showed its real face. And when it did, humanity would not be on its knees. It was Daniel who found the file. 14 months into the acceleration phase, with 6 ships now fully assembled and their crews in final training, Daniel was doing a routine cross-check of Council communication intercepts. A program Priya had been running quietly in the background for over a year, slowly building a library of decoded Vreth private communications. Most of it was administrative traffic. Logistics. Personnel movements. Nothing that told them anything they didn't already know. Until Daniel opened a file labeled, in Vreth, Sequence Harvan 7. He called Rachel at 2 a.m. She arrived at Site Caro 20 minutes later, still in civilian clothes, and found him sitting alone in the communications room with the decoded translation on the screen in front of him and a look on his face she had never seen before. Daniel Cross was not a man who was easily shaken. He had been in combat. He had survived things that broke other people. But right now he looked like someone who had just discovered that the ground under his feet was not what he thought it was. "How bad?" Rachel said from the doorway. "Read it," he said. She read it. Sequence Harvan 7 was a Council operational plan. Dated, in Council timekeeping, to approximately 30 months from now, which put its execution at roughly mid-2192. It was a full-spectrum extraction protocol. The plan was systematic and cold. It had been in development since before first contact. Before the golden light in the sky. Before the Vero pills. Before the clean energy. Before all of it. The plan was this. Earth had something the Council needed. Not soldiers. Not resources in the conventional sense. Earth had a specific combination of biological and geological properties that made it, the word the document used in the cold technical language of Council administration, a Class 7 harvest world. Every few thousand years, the Council identified planets that had developed to a certain level, complex biosphere, mineral-rich crust, atmospheric stability, and they harvested them. Not the people specifically. The planet. The process involved a series of orbital bombardments that would systematically strip the biosphere, every living thing, every ecosystem, in exchange for the raw planetary material underneath. The integration period, the technology sharing, the medical advances, the peace and prosperity, was not generosity. It was preparation. Like fattening an animal before slaughter. A planet that had been given the Council's energy grid was a planet that had voluntarily connected itself to a control system. A planet whose military had been reduced under Article 7 was a planet that couldn't fight back. A planet whose population had been given Vero, the anti-aging medication, was a population with a documented biological profile in the Council's database, useful for certain secondary extraction processes that the document described in terms Rachel forced herself to read and never fully recovered from. Rachel finished reading. She sat down in the chair next to Daniel. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The facility hummed around them. Generators, ventilation, the distant sound of machinery in the assembly bays where the seventh ship was being built. They were never going to let us live, Daniel said. No, Rachel said. The whole thing. Every gift, every treaty, every ambassador smiling at us. Every time Solon came to your office and asked why you didn't seem happy. His voice was steady but barely. It was all theater. Yes. 30 months, Daniel said. We have 30 months. We have less than that, Rachel said. We need to be operational before they start the preliminary bombardment sequence, which the document says begins 6 months before the main extraction. So we have 24 months. At the outside. She stood up. The shock, and it was shock, genuine and deep, was still moving through her, but underneath it, solid and unmovable, was the thing that had always been there. The instinct. The refusal. Not on her watch. Get the team together, she said. Everyone. Full briefing in 2 hours. It's 2 in the morning, Rachel. I know. Get them here. The briefing was the hardest thing she had ever done. Standing in front of the people who had given everything to this project, who had sacrificed their privacy, their sleep, their peace of mind, their relationships, and telling them that everything they'd feared was true and worse. She showed them sequence Harvan 7. She let them read it. She didn't soften it. Nina went very still. Ortega turned away from the screen and looked at the wall for a full minute. Priya had tears running down her face, but her voice was completely level when she said, I knew. Some part of me always knew. Webb looked like a man receiving a death sentence. Then he straightened. He squared his shoulders. He looked at Rachel. Tell us the new plan, he said. She told them. The Armada would not wait for completion. They would not build 15 ships and then act. They would build every ship they could in the time they had, and when the moment came, when the Council made its move, the Armada would meet them. Not to defend. To attack. To hit the Council fleet with everything humanity had, and hit them hard enough, fast enough, and with enough fury that every other species watching in this galaxy would understand, once and for all, that Earth was not a harvest world. Earth was a world that fought back. There is one more thing, Rachel said before she let them go. She looked at each face. What I'm about to ask of you goes beyond this facility. It goes beyond the military. We need to tell the world. Not the governments, not yet, because too many of them are too dependent on Council systems. We tell the people. Through every back channel, every independent network, every journalist and activist and ordinary human being we can reach. We tell them what the Council is. We tell them what sequence Harvan 7 says. And we give them the chance to fight. The room was quiet. Then Daniel Cross, who never made speeches, said quietly, 8 billion people who don't know they're about to be erased. I think they'd want to know. Yes, Rachel said. They would. Caro, we do this for all of them. Every single one. The leak was one of the most carefully engineered operations in human history. Rachel understood something fundamental about information. If it comes from authority, people can be made to doubt it. Governments can be pressured. Institutions can be discredited. But if information comes from everywhere at once, from independent scientists and small-town journalists and anonymous engineers and foreign academics, it becomes impossible to contain because there is no single source to attack. So they didn't use a single source. Priya coordinated the translation of sequence HFY into 47 languages. Not official translations. Careful, human translations by people who understood the weight of every word. Daniel built a distribution network using pre-council internet infrastructure, routing through servers and relay systems that existed outside the council's energy grid and therefore outside their monitoring capability. Nina prepared a supplementary technical document explaining, in language that any high school physics student could understand, exactly what the council's orbital bombardment sequence would do to Earth. She stripped every piece of technical jargon out of it and replaced it with simple, clear human words. She told the truth about what a Class 7 harvest looked like. She told the truth about what happened to the Harvan populations during the process. She did not spare details because false comfort was the enemy of survival. On a Thursday evening in late 2191, 63 different media outlets in 41 countries simultaneously received a package of information. Not emails. Physical drives, delivered by couriers who didn't know what they were carrying, to the personal addresses of journalists with established records of resisting pressure. People who had gone to prison for their sources before, people who had been threatened and kept publishing anyway. Within 6 hours, the story was everywhere. The council's response was swift and, for the first time, openly aggressive. Solon arrived at Rachel's office within the hour, not smiling this time, his mirror-black eyes hard and direct. "This is a destabilization effort," Solon said. "It is a violation of the Treaty of Stars. Article 7. Article 7, Rachel said, not standing up from her desk, looking directly at him with complete calm, is what you use to quietly cut the power to people asking for fairness. It's what you use to disarm us. It's the leash. We know what it is, Solon. We know what Harvan means. We know about sequence HFY. The silence that followed was different from any silence Rachel had experienced in Solon's presence. The warmth, that careful, practiced warmth, disappeared completely. What was underneath it was not anger. It was something older. Something that had been looking at humanity for 2 years the way a farmer looks at a field, not with malice but with ownership. "You were not supposed to access that document," Solon said. "No," Rachel agreed. "We weren't. You understand," Solon said, his voice quiet now, almost gentle, "that what comes next is not something I have control over. The council will not allow this to disrupt the sequence." "I know," Rachel said. "I'm counting on it." Solon left. Rachel picked up her phone and called Site Caro. "Begin launch protocols," she said. Meanwhile, the world was waking up. The public response to sequence HFY was unlike anything in human history. The document's cold, technical language, its complete lack of malice, its treatment of 8 billion people as a measurable resource, landed on the human consciousness like a physical blow. There was no spin the council could apply, because the document wasn't ideological. It was administrative. It read the way a recipe reads. Step by step. Efficient. Complete. People didn't just react with fear. They reacted with something older and harder, the specific fury of a creature that has been caged without knowing it. Governments that had been council compliant for 2 years began receiving pressure unlike anything they had experienced. Protesters surrounded council diplomatic facilities on every continent. Military officers who had been quietly uneasy for months started making calls to each other. Scientists who had been working on council projects began looking at their work with new eyes. And in hundreds of living rooms and town squares and workplaces around the world, ordinary people, people who had taken the Veryl pills and used the free energy and been genuinely grateful, looked at the sky and felt something shift inside them. Rachel monitored all of it from Site Caro. She watched the awakening happen in real time and felt a fierce, painful love for the species she was part of. They had been tricked. They had been fattened and calmed and led toward slaughter. And now they knew. And they were furious. President Torres called Rachel directly. "Commander Hayes," he said, and his voice was older than the last time she'd heard it. "Is it real?" "Yes, Mr. President." A long pause. "The Armada. The thing the council is screaming about. The ships." "Yes, sir." Another pause. "How many ships do we have?" 9 completed and crewed. 3 in final assembly. "I want 12 when we launch." "When do you launch?" "When they move," Rachel said. "And they're going to move soon, sir. Solon already told me. They won't let this leak disrupt the sequence." "What do you need from me?" Rachel thought about 2 years of secrecy. 2 years of working around governments and treaties and comfortable trust. She thought about all the time she had been overruled, dismissed, called paranoid. "I need you to stand behind us," she said. "Publicly. Completely. Whatever happens next." A very long pause. "You have it," Torres said. "God help us all, Commander. You have it." They came out in the morning. Not just from Site Caro. That was the element the Council had not anticipated. Site Caro was the origin, but in the 2 years of its construction, the contingency plan had quietly extended fingers into 11 other locations around the world. Underground hangars in the Australian outback. Sealed caverns beneath the Tibetan plateau. A decommissioned submarine base in the North Atlantic that had been repurposed and extended far below the ocean floor. Wherever Rachel's team had been able to build without detection, wherever they had been able to train crews and stockpile materials, they had built. The Armada of Destruction, that was the name the press had given it, and Rachel had decided to let it stand because it was honest, consisted of 14 warships when the launch order went out. Not 15. Not the clean number she'd aimed for. But 14, and every one of them crewed by men and women who had been preparing for this for 2 years and who had read Sequence Harvin 7 and chosen, with full knowledge of what it meant to be here. Caro led the formation. Rachel commanded her personally, standing on the bridge with Daniel at her right and Nina at the weapons console and Ortega running fleet communications from the ship behind them, Resolute, the second vessel in the line. The ascent from Site Caro was the most extraordinary experience of Rachel's life. The launch shaft, 400 meters deep, had been designed for exactly this moment. A straight vertical path through the Colorado bedrock, sealed with electromagnetic shielding that kept their energy signature invisible until the moment they broke the surface. Caro accelerated at 6G through the shaft, the crew braced in their molded acceleration seats, and then the surface shield blew away in a shower of earth and rock and morning light, and they were in the open air, climbing, the Rocky Mountains falling away below them and the sky turning from blue to violet to the deep black of space in what felt like no time at all. 14 ships from 11 locations. They assembled in low Earth orbit in less than 12 minutes. The Council fleet was already there. Not the 3-ship peacekeeping force they'd used for Article 7 interventions. The full orbital presence, 22 Vreth warships, the same smooth diamond shapes as Zaren's landing ship but armed, glowing with weapon systems, arranged in a semicircle over the Western Hemisphere. Rachel looked at them on the Caro's main screen and felt nothing except clarity. 22 against 14, she thought. They're going to regret that. The reason she could think that was sitting in the tactical analysis that Nina had been building for 2 years. Vreth warships were large, powerful, and extremely well shielded against energy weapons. But they had 2 critical weaknesses that the Council had never had cause to discover, because no species they'd ever harvested had managed to reach this point. First, their shields were optimized against directed energy and railgun kinetics at standard velocities. Nina's hypersonic kinetic rounds, fired at 40,000 kilometers per second, 3 times what the Council shields were rated for, would penetrate. Second, the resonance weapons. The crystalline Vreth hull structure had a specific vibration frequency at which it would fracture. Not slowly. Instantly. Nina had called it, with dark precision, ringing the bell. You hit a Vreth ship with a resonance burst at the right frequency and the hull simply fell apart. The Council didn't know about either of these systems because they had never thought humanity was capable of developing them. A SYMJHY, Rachel thought. From this point on, no more underestimating us. High Counselor Zaren's face appeared on the Caro's communications screen. He looked older than the last time Rachel had seen him, or perhaps just less composed. The careful kindness was completely gone. What was underneath was, as she'd suspected, something much colder. "Commander Hayes," Zaren said, "you have violated the Treaty of Stars. You have constructed unauthorized military vessels. You have distributed classified Council documentation. This fleet..." He paused and she could see the smallest flicker of genuine surprise in his black eyes, "is impressive. Truly. But you are outnumbered and outgunned. Stand down now, and the Council will allow Earth's population to survive as a designated preservation colony." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "High Counselor," she said, and her voice was so level, so calm, that she heard Daniel breathe out beside her. "Harvin means livestock. Means resource deposit. You came here with smiles and medicine and clean energy, and the whole time, you were planning to strip this planet bare and leave 8 billion bodies floating in the debris." She paused. "So I want you to understand something, and I want every ship in your fleet to hear it. and I want every species watching this in whatever corner of the galaxy you've told this story to understand it as well. She sat back. Humanity is not livestock. We are not a deposit. We are not a harvest. We are the most stubborn, most creative, most furious species you have ever made the mistake of underestimating. And we are done being your Harvin. She looked at Nina. Weapons free, she said. Caro opened fire. The first exchange lasted 11 minutes. Later, historians would spend decades analyzing the Battle of Earth orbit, the tactics, the technology, the decisions made in those 11 minutes that changed the course of humanity's future. But in the moment, from Rachel's perspective, it was simply the most intense series of decisions she had ever made in her life, compressed together so tightly that there was no space between them for anything except pure focused function. Nina's first resonance burst hit the lead Vreth warship at the precise calculated frequency, and the ship came apart like a glass dropped on concrete. A single silent explosion of fragments that scattered across the orbital plane in a wide, glittering arc. No dramatic fireball. No Hollywood explosion. Just a ship and then not a ship. The efficiency of it was, in its way, more frightening than fire would have been. The Council fleet took exactly 4 seconds to respond, 4 seconds of what Rachel imagined was genuine shock, and then opened up with everything they had. The barrage hit Caro's shields with a force that shook the entire ship and knocked 2 crew members from their stations. The dark alloy hull rang like a struck bell, a real bell, not the resonance metaphor, and Rachel grabbed the edge of her console and held on. The shield held. Nina had built it for this. It held. Return fire full spread, Rachel said. Target the shield generators on their flanking ships. Hit them where their shields overlap. That's the weakest point. Daniel was already on fleet communications. Caro to all ships. Diamond formation, close the gap, force their targeting arcs to narrow. If they can't spread their fire, they can't saturate our shields. The 14 ships of the Armada moved. This was the second advantage Rachel had spent 2 years building. Not just the weapons, not just the shields, but the crews. Human crews who had trained specifically in this exact environment, this exact type of engagement, against models of Vreth tactical doctrine that Priya had assembled from 2 years of decoded communications. Every pilot, every weapons officer, every navigator on every ship in the Armada had run this scenario 100 times in simulation. The Vreth had run no simulations against humanity. They never needed to. Ortega's Resolute cut across the left flank of the Council formation at an angle their targeting systems hadn't anticipated and put 3 hypersonic kinetic rounds through the shield generator of the second Council warship. The ship didn't explode. It went dark, silent, adrift, its weapons offline. The third ship turned to respond to Resolute and exposed its rear quarter to Caro's resonance projector. Nina hit it. 3 ships gone or disabled in the opening phase. The Council fleet regrouped, pulling their formation tighter, shifting to a defensive configuration that suggested they were recalibrating, trying to understand what they were dealing with. In the brief pause, Rachel looked at the damage board. 2 of the Armada ships had taken significant hits. Pioneer was venting atmosphere from a hull breach on its lower deck and had dropped out of the main formation. Independence had lost its primary weapons system and was running on secondaries. 12 fully functional ships against 19 Council vessels. The math was still not in their favor. They're learning, Daniel said quietly, watching the Council formation shift. Good, Rachel said. Let them learn. We have something they can't learn fast enough. What she meant was this. The Vreth were an ancient, highly advanced civilization. They had fought wars. They had subdued planets. They had harvested species. They had done all of this across thousands of years, without ever meeting a species that had looked at their technology, taken it apart, improved it, and come back swinging. Humanity's specific genius, the thing that had gotten them from stone tools to nuclear power in the geological equivalent of an afternoon, was adaptation. The ability to look at a problem and find a new way through it that no one expected. Not because humans were smarter than every species in the galaxy, but because they were absolutely relentless about it. In the 12 minutes between the first and second phases of the engagement, while the Council fleet was regrouping, Nina was already identifying a new vulnerability. The Vreth had reconfigured their shields to absorb resonance frequencies, a fast, impressive adaptation. But the reconfiguration used additional power, which showed up as a specific energy signature in their reactor outputs. They've weakened their kinetic defense to boost the resonance buffer, Nina said, and there was a brightness in her eyes that was part engineer and part something much older. They traded one problem for another. Hypersonic kinetics full spread, Rachel said. The second phase of the Battle of Earth orbit was shorter and louder and more decisive than the first. 5 Council ships disabled or destroyed. The Armada lost Frontier, a full ship, 38 crew, and Rachel felt each of them like a physical loss that she would carry for the rest of her life. But Frontier's sacrifice forced the Council's right flank to pivot, and that pivot exposed 3 ships to a coordinated strike from Resolute and Defender that ended the battle's middle phase in 90 seconds. When the firing stopped, the count was 7 Council ships destroyed, 6 disabled. 9 still functional and pulling back, not retreating, regrouping, but definitely out of the engagement zone. The Armada, 11 functional, 1 venting atmosphere but still combat capable, 1 running on secondary systems. Zaren's face appeared on the screen again. He looked for the first time like something Rachel recognized, not alien, not ancient, not powerful. He looked uncertain. You have performed beyond any recorded capability of a pre-integration species, Zaren said. The formal tone was intact but something underneath it had cracked. This level of what? Rachel said. Of resistance? Of refusing to be Harvan? She leaned forward. High Counselor. I'm going to say something and I want you to hear it very clearly. You have 9 functional ships left in Earth orbit. I have 11 plus 2 that can still fight. If you want to continue this engagement, I will finish it. But if you want to survive this day with those 9 ships intact, you will do 3 things. First, you will transmit on all Council frequencies a full withdrawal order for every Council vessel within 1 light-year of Earth. Second, you will transmit on every channel available to you the full text of sequence Harvan 7, with a Council seal acknowledging its authenticity. You will tell the galaxy what you tried to do here. Third, you will leave. All of you. And you will never come back. Zaren stared at her. And if I refuse? He said. Rachel looked at Nina. Then we ring every bell in your fleet, she said. Zaren transmitted the withdrawal order. Rachel watched the 9 remaining Council ships turn from Earth orbit and begin their exit trajectory, slow, careful, like animals backing away from something that had bitten them. She watched until the last one crossed the orbital perimeter. She watched until the tracking systems confirmed they were accelerating away from Earth at full drive, not a deceptive feint, genuinely leaving. Then she sat down in her command chair, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't have to pretend that everything was fine. The bridge of Cairo was quiet. Nina had her head bowed over her console, working through the post-battle systems check with the focused attention that was her way of processing everything that wasn't machinery. Daniel was standing at the viewport looking at Earth. The curve of it, the blue and white and brown beauty of it, hanging below them in the black. The crew were at their stations, still breathing. Someone on the lower deck started clapping. Then someone else. Then more, until the sound filled the ship, not the wild celebratory applause of a film, but something quieter and more raw, the specific sound of people who had been holding their breath for 2 years and had finally exhaled. Rachel didn't clap. She sat in her chair and looked at Earth and let herself feel, for a few minutes, the full weight of what had just happened. The Frontier's crew, 38 people who had known exactly what they were volunteering for and had shown up anyway. The 2 years of secrecy and sacrifice from every person who had worked at Site Cairo and the 11 satellite locations. The ordinary people of Earth who had woken up 2 weeks ago to the truth and had responded not with surrender but with anger and courage. The cost of this was real. She would never minimize it. But Earth was still here. The Council's second demand had been fulfilled. Zaren had transmitted the full text of sequence Harvan 7 on Council frequencies. Sullen, clearly coerced, probably expecting to find some way to walk it back later. But Priya's team was already capturing and distributing the transmission. The Council seal was on it. The authentication codes were verified. In every corner of the galaxy where Council communications reached, every species that had ever been approached, integrated, or was currently being prepared for harvest was receiving the document that explained what the galactic community really was. What do you think happens now? Daniel said, still looking at Earth. Out there. In the rest of the galaxy. I think, Rachel said carefully, that we are not the only species that has been angry and had no idea what to do about it. I think that the Council has been doing this for a long time, to a lot of people who never had an armada. And I think the Council just had a very bad day in front of an audience. She paused. The consequences of that are going to take years to understand. Maybe decades. She stood up and moved to stand beside him at the viewport. But right now I am looking at a planet that is still alive and I can't think about anything beyond that. Below them, Earth turned in the morning light. The communications channels were overwhelming. Every government on Earth, every military commander, every head of state, every ambassador, Every ordinary person who had somehow gotten access to an open frequency was flooding the Armada's communication system with messages. Rachel didn't try to answer them. She let Daniel handle the priority traffic and she stood at the viewport and breathed. President Torres reached her 30 minutes after the council withdrawal. "Commander Hayes," he said, and his voice was different from every previous call. Steady in a new way. "The council is gone?" "Withdrawn from Earth orbit, sir. Heading out system." "And the document, the transmission?" "Going out on all channels. The galaxy knows." A long pause. "Rachel." It was the first time he'd used her first name. "What you did, what your people did, I want you to know that I understand what it cost. I know about Frontier. I know about every person who worked underground for 2 years. I know about the choices you made when no one in authority was ready to make them." His voice broke slightly. "On behalf of 8 billion people who are still alive tonight because of you. On behalf of the 38 people on Frontier," Rachel said, "thank you, Mr. President. Make sure they're remembered." "I will," he said. "I promise." She ended the call and looked at Daniel. "Rest period," she said. 4 hours minimum for everyone. Then we have a planet to figure out." "What does figuring out the planet look like?" Daniel said. Rachel thought about the clean energy grid that was council technology. The medical supplies that were council manufactured. The infrastructure that 8 billion people depended on, real, functioning, life-sustaining infrastructure that was now disconnected from its source. "It looks like a lot of very hard work," she said. "HFY, from this point on we do it ourselves. Everything. We don't wait for anyone to give us what we need. We build it. We learn it. We make it ours." She looked at the planet. "We always should have." The council's departure left a gap that was both smaller and larger than anyone expected. Smaller because Nina and her engineering teams had spent 2 years quietly building human-manufactured alternatives to every critical council system. The clean energy grid was council technology, but the underlying principle was not. It was physics, and human physicists had understood the physics within 6 months of first exposure. Site Caro's pre-contact nuclear reactors had been the first step, but Nina's team had gone much further, developing a compact fusion system that was entirely terrestrial in design and material, built from a principle the council had accidentally pointed them toward and that humanity had then sprinted past. Within 72 hours of the council withdrawal, the first non-council power stations were coming online in 12 countries. Within 3 weeks, the grid was stable enough that the council infrastructure could be switched off section by section without disruption. Larger because the psychological gap was enormous. For 2 years, 8 billion people had lived inside a story that told them they were cared for, protected, welcomed into a community of civilizations. The story had been a lie from the first word and everyone now knew it. The grief of that, the specific grief of having been deceived when you were most hoping, was real and widespread and took time. Rachel didn't try to rush it. She didn't go on television and give a speech about resilience and moving forward. She let people be angry. She let them mourn. She let the complicated, painful process of truth settling happen at its own pace. She was dealing with her own version of it. The Veryl pills, the anti-aging medication the council had distributed freely and which most of the global population had been taking for 2 years, were the most urgent problem. The medical section of Sequence Harvin 7 had described the pills as serving as secondary biological profiling function, which, once fully translated and analyzed by Earth's medical community, turned out to mean that Veryl had been building a comprehensive genetic database of humanity while also providing its medical benefits. The anti-aging effects were real. The surveillance was also real. The two had been designed together, inseparably. Dr. Maya Reeves, the head of Earth's newly reorganized Independent Medical Research Division, spent 3 weeks analyzing Veryl's molecular structure and then came to Rachel with the answer. "The profiling function is passive," Maya said. "It's not transmitting to the council. It was transmitting, but that stopped when they left. The anti-aging component is biochemically separate. It works on a different mechanism." "Can we replicate just the beneficial component?" Rachel said. Maya paused. "Yes. It'll take us about 2 years to synthesize it in sufficient quantities. The chemistry isn't beyond us. It's just a lot of chemistry." "Then we start today," Rachel said. 2 years felt like a long time. But it wasn't. In the context of what humanity was building now, a completely self-sufficient, independent civilization on its own terms, 2 years was nothing. The world that emerged in the months following the Battle of Earth orbit was different in tone from anything that had come before. The Council's integration period had, ironically, accelerated human technological development significantly. The technologies they'd shared were now fully human understood and human controlled. The medical knowledge was being integrated into Earth's own research programs. The physics principles behind the energy systems were being taught in universities. The Council had come to strip the planet. What they left behind, accidentally, was a significantly more advanced humanity. Rachel found this darkly funny when she allowed herself to think about it. At Site Cairo, now an official open installation, its secrecy no longer necessary, the Armada ships were undergoing maintenance and expansion. The 14 ships that had fought in the battle were being repaired and upgraded. New construction had begun on 6 additional vessels. Not for conquest. Not for revenge. For readiness. Because the Council was gone. But the Council was not destroyed. And the galaxy, as Rachel had said to Daniel, was very large. General Webb came to see her 3 months after the battle. He was officially retired now, had submitted his papers the day after the battle, which Rachel had tried to talk him out of. He looked better than he had in years. Lighter somehow. Like a man who had put down a burden he'd carried so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. "How are you?" he asked, sitting across from her in her office. "I'm working," Rachel said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. "I'm working," she said again, and this time her voice was slightly softer. "It's the same thing. Cairo, the facility, the ships, the people here, this is how I'm doing. This is how I am." She paused. "I'll be better when the synthesis work is done and everyone still has their medication. I'll be better when the grid is fully independent. I'll be better when the next generation of ships is built. I'll be better when this planet is safe, actually safe, not safe because someone powerful decided not to hurt us yet." Webb nodded slowly. "The Council won't come back. Not for a long time." "No," Rachel agreed. "But someone else might. And the next time we'll be ready from the start." Webb stood to leave, then paused. "The Frontier Memorial. Have you seen it?" Rachel shook her head. "It went up last week in Colorado. Outside the original Site Cairo entrance." He paused. "You should see it." She went that evening alone as the sun was setting over the mountains. The memorial was simple, 38 names on a black stone slab with a single line underneath. They chose to be here. They knew what it meant. They came anyway. Rachel stood in front of it for a long time. The Colorado wind moved over the mountains. The sky above was the specific deep blue of late evening, the first stars beginning to show. 38 people who had believed in something enough to give everything for it. She pressed her hand against the stone. "Cairo," she said softly. "To all of them. To the facility behind her. To the planet below her. To everything she had spent 2 years guarding with everything she had. Cairo, we care for this. We guard it. We always will." The transmission of sequence Harvin 7 on Council frequencies changed the galaxy. Not quickly. Not cleanly. Change never is. But it changed it. Priya spent the months after the battle working with a small team of xenolinguists and astrophysicists, monitoring the signals coming back, the responses from other civilizations scattered across the galaxy that had received the document and were reacting. Most of these signals were in languages that took weeks or months to partially decode. Some were in languages they couldn't decode at all. Only the emotional frequency of the transmission, if it could be called that, was clear. Others were in forms of communication that had no direct equivalent in human experience. But some were clear. 3 species, the Cellin, the Dwarith, and a collective intelligence that humanity tentatively called the Chorus, transmitted direct responses to Earth within 2 months. All 3 in their own languages, which Priya decoded with painstaking care. All 3 communicating, in the specific ways their civilizations expressed it, the same fundamental thing. "We know. We have always known. We could not fight. You showed us it was possible." The Cellin were a species 60 light-years from Earth. They had been fully integrated into the Galactic Council for 400 years. They were, by the Council's calculation, completely dependent. Their energy systems, their food production, their medical infrastructure all running on Council technology. They had been Harvin for so long that most of their population no longer even questioned it. But a faction had always resisted. Had always kept records. Had always passed down, generation to generation, the memory of what independence felt like. They called themselves, in their language, the Cairo. The Guardians of the Old Flame. Rachel read Priya's translation of the Cellin transmission 3 times. The 4th time, she read it aloud to the full team assembled in Site Cairo's main briefing room. When she reached the part that said, in careful, formal Cellin diplomatic language, "We have built a ship. It is small. But it is ours. We wish to send it to Earth. We wish to ask if you will help us build more." She stopped reading. The room was silent. Daniel was the first to speak. "We should say yes," he said simply. "The Council will see it as an act of war," Rachel said. "Helping a Council-integrated species build an independent fleet." "The Council already sees us as a threat," Ortega said. "We beat them in their first engagement. They're not going to shrug that off. Whatever we do now, we're at war. It's just a question of what shape the war takes." Rachel looked at the translated message. At the Sellan word Karo, meaning, in their language, something she recognized immediately. To guard. To protect. To give everything for what matters. "We say yes," she said. The response they transmitted to the Sellan was brief and took a week to carefully compose in the correct linguistic and cultural format. But its essential content was 3 words that Priya translated across the language gap as accurately as she could. "You are not alone." It was, they all recognized, an echo of the first message the Council had ever sent to Earth. The same words. Used now for the opposite purpose. The Dwaratha's message came with an attachment, a full technical schematic for a weapons system that had no equivalent in anything Earth's physicists had seen, built on a principle that Nina spent 2 sleepless weeks analyzing before emerging from her office with dark circles under her eyes and a brilliance in her face that Rachel had learned to associate with genuine discovery. "They invented something we didn't," Nina said. 300 years ago, apparently, and the Council suppressed it and never let them develop it further. But they kept the schematics. She held up her tablet with the look of a person holding something precious. "It's a gravity weapon, Rachel. They figured out how to fold space around a target and compress it. The math is..." She stopped herself. "I'll need 6 months to understand it properly." "You have whatever you need," Rachel said. "I know I do," Nina said, and something in her voice was lighter than it had been in 2 years. "I've always known that." The chorus was the most difficult to communicate with, not because they were hostile, but because their mode of existence was so fundamentally different from anything humanity had previously conceptualized. They appeared to be a civilization of beings that communicated in pure mathematics and experienced time non-linearly. Priya could decode their transmissions well enough to understand their emotional meaning but not their technical content. What she could say with confidence was that the chorus was ancient, far older than the Council, and that their response to the sequence Harvan 7 transmission was, as best she could translate it, something between satisfaction and relief. "I think," Priya told Rachel one evening, sitting in the Site Caro cafeteria over cups of very bad coffee, "that the chorus has been waiting for this for a very long time. I think they've been watching the Council do this to species after species for thousands of years and they've been," she searched for the word, "hoping. Hoping that eventually one of the Harvan species would find a way to bite back. And now one finally did." Rachel looked at her coffee. "Why didn't they help us?" "I'm not sure I can fully understand their reasons," Priya said. "But the best translation I have is something like, it had to come from you. It had to be your choice, your building, your fight. Otherwise you would still be dependent. Just dependent on us instead of them." Rachel sat with that for a moment. "They're not wrong," she said. "No," Priya agreed. "They're really not." The Council, meanwhile, was not idle. Intelligence from the Council-adjacent space near Earth's star system showed them rebuilding their orbital fleet, moving ships from other sectors, reassigning resources, clearly preparing for a return engagement. They weren't going to let the sequence Harvan 7 revelation or the Battle of Earth orbit stand without response. The only question was when and in what form. Rachel spent her days preparing. The Armada now numbered 18 ships, with 4 more in construction. The Sellan's small independent vessel had arrived in Earth's system 6 weeks after their transmission. A beautiful, fragile-looking thing, built in secret over years with stolen materials and desperate ingenuity, crewed by 12 Sellan who landed at Site Caro and stood in the mountain air looking at the sky with an expression that Rachel recognized from every human who had ever made it through something impossible. Their names were unpronounceable by human vocal cords. So Daniel, being Daniel, gave them nicknames within 2 days. The captain became Ace. The chief engineer became Nina too, which made the original Nina simultaneously annoyed and deeply touched. They were not the last to come. The Council came back 14 months later. Not with 22 ships. With 60. Rachel had known it was coming. The intelligence had been building for months. Fleet movements, resource reallocation, the specific patterns that Priya and her team had learned to read in Council communications. When the first ships began crossing into Earth's star system, Rachel was already on the bridge of Caro, already in communication with the full Armada, already running the final pre-engagement checks that her crews could now do in their sleep. The Armada numbered 23 ships. Earth's own fleet, built in the ground and launched from underneath. Plus 4 Cylon vessels. Plus 2 Dwarith warships, whose captains had arrived 3 months earlier and integrated into the Armada's formation with a speed and grace that suggested they had been mentally preparing for this fight for a very long time. Plus 1 Chorus vessel that appeared from nowhere on the fleet tracking systems 8 hours before the Council arrived. A vast, dark, irregular shape that generated no readable energy signature and appeared to be, by every sensor Earth had, simply a piece of space that was slightly more solid than the space around it. 30 ships in total. Against 60. Rachel looked at the tactical display and felt something she recognized from every combat situation she had ever been in. The specific mathematics of an unfavorable engagement that had to be fought anyway. She had run these numbers 100 times over the past months, and the answer was always the same. They would lose ships. They would lose people. There was no version of this engagement where all 30 ships went home. But Earth would be standing at the end of it. She was certain of that. She looked around the bridge of Caro. Daniel at communications. Nina at weapons. New officers at navigation and tactical, crew members who had trained harder than any generation before them, who knew what they were defending and why. She thought about Webb, retired, who had come back to Site Caro yesterday just to be there. Not in a command role, just to be present because he had started this alongside her and he wanted to see it through. She thought about Priya in the communications center below, coordinating the Alliance fleet's translation systems because a battle fought by humans and Cylon and Dwarith and whatever the chorus was required everyone to understand what everyone else was saying. She thought about the Frontiers crew. About the 38 names on the Black Stone in Colorado. They chose to be here. They knew what it meant. They came anyway. All ships, she said on the open fleet channel. All human, all Cylon, all Dwarith, with the chorus vessel doing whatever it did that served as listening. This is Commander Rachel Hayes aboard Caro. We know why we're here. We know what's at stake. We've built something together, ships, trust, a coalition of species who refused to accept what the Council decided we were. Today we show the galaxy what that coalition can do. She paused. Caro, today. All of us. HFY. From this point on, everything. The battle lasted 4 hours. The early phases were brutal. The Council had learned from their first defeat. They came with countermeasures for the resonance weapons, heavier shields, faster targeting systems. 4 Armada ships were disabled in the first 30 minutes. 3 beyond recovery. Rachel made each command decision for the continuing ships with the full knowledge of what they were costing and refused to let the cost make her hesitate, because hesitation would cost more. Nina's gravity weapon, adapted from the Dwarith schematics in 6 months of near-constant work, entered the engagement in Phase 2. She had armed 3 ships with it, Caro, Resolute and one of the Dwarith vessels. The first time it fired, the effect was so dramatic that both sides paused for nearly 5 seconds. A Council warship twice the size of anything in the Armada folding inward with complete silence and then simply stopping to exist. That's going to change things, Daniel said. It changes everything, Nina said. Her voice was completely level. Her hands were steady on the console. The chorus vessel acted in ways that Rachel would spend years trying to understand and never fully succeed. It moved through the Council formation like the concept of movement itself. Not around ships, somehow through them, creating effects that had no analogy in any physics textbook anyone on Earth had ever read. 3 Council ships developed cascading system failures simultaneously with no apparent cause. A coordinated attack run by 12 Council vessels on the left flank of the Armada formation simply didn't go where it was aimed. The targeting data was perfect. The ships performed perfectly. The weapons simply arrived in empty space. Ace, the Cylon captain who had become one of the most devastatingly effective combat commanders in the Alliance fleet, led the 4 Cylon ships in a cutting run through the Council center formation that split their line in 2 and forced a disengagement that gave the Armada's damaged ships time to regroup. In the final phase, with the Council fleet at half strength and their formation fractured, Zarin appeared on Rachel's screen for the second time. He looked old. Not in the way humans looked old, but in the way that ancient things look when they encounter something they cannot categorize. He had planned this species. He had prepared this harvest. He had built the integration over years with care and precision. He had never, in thousands of years of doing exactly this, encountered this. This ends badly for everyone, Zarin said. It ends badly for the Council, Rachel said. Everyone else is doing fine. You cannot win a sustained campaign against the full resources of... We're not running a sustained campaign, Rachel said. We're ending this engagement today in Earth's orbit. And then we're going to do the same thing you did when you first arrived here. She paused. We're going to send a message. She looked at Priya on the communications feed. Send it, she said. The message had been composed by Rachel, Priya, Ace, the Dwarith captain, and, in a form that had taken Priya 3 weeks to translate properly, the chorus. It went out on every council frequency simultaneously. It went to every species in the council's sphere of influence. It went to the Harvan worlds. It went to the integrated civilizations. It went to the planets currently in preparation for extraction. The message was simple. It said, "The Galactic Council has harvested worlds for 10,000 years. They have called themselves a community and called their victims members. They have given gifts that were chains and signed treaties that were cages. Earth was to be their next harvest. Earth said no. Today, in orbit above Earth, the Council's fleet has been defeated for the second time. Any species that wishes to say no, we will help you. We will share what we know. We will stand beside you. You do not have to be Harvan. None of us do. The Earth Alliance." The battle ended 40 minutes later. The Council withdrew. This time, everyone knew they weren't coming back. Not because they'd been defeated militarily, though they had been twice decisively, but because the message had reached its audience. Because across the galaxy, in the quiet places where hope had been suppressed for thousands of years, something was stirring. Because the Council's model, their long, careful, perfect model of integration and harvest, depended on the Harvan species believing that resistance was impossible. And now every species in the galaxy had watched 14 ships rise from the ground of a pre-integration world and fight back. The model was broken. Rachel stood at the viewport of Caro and watched the Council fleet leave Earth's system for the last time. The damage board was behind her. 7 ships lost, 112 crew. She would go to that board and she would learn every name and she would carry every name. That was the price of today, and it was a real price, and she would never pretend otherwise. But Earth was here. And for the first time in 2 years, maybe for the first time since a Tuesday morning in 2187 when the sky cracked open with light, Rachel Hayes felt something she barely recognized. She felt safe. Not because someone powerful had decided not to hurt them. Not because they had signed a treaty or accepted gifts or been welcomed into a community. Because they had built their own ships, trained their own crews, found their own allies, developed their own weapons, stood in their own sky and refused to fall. Daniel came to stand beside her. "What now?" he said. She looked at Earth below them, blue and alive and turning in the morning light, scars of atmosphere where the battle had been fought already beginning to fade. "Now," Rachel said, "we build the world we actually want. Not the one someone else planned for us. Ours." She looked at him. "It's going to take a while. Probably forever," Daniel said. "Probably forever," she agreed. She looked back at the planet. "Caro," she thought one last time. "We guard you. We love you. We are never letting you go. HFY, from this point on, we are free."